Hey guys, so today I wanted to talk about gust effects in the Pokemon TCG, why I like them, some of the changes that are coming to the card game, and what I think they could do to make it better. So let's just dive right into the first thing. They just announced the reprints for a bunch of cards: Ultra Ball, Energy Switch, Rare Candy, Pokemon Switch, and Boss's Orders. Now the reason why this is a big deal is because Boss's Orders hasn't been in print in a while. We were a little bit afraid that it wasn't going to get that new symbol at the bottom, but we can confirm that is getting reprinted in the I block, which means it's not going to rotate next year. So what are the implications for this into the metagame? Well, first off, Boss's Orders is a staple of not even just the format, but the Pokemon game in general. I mean, Gust effects have been around since the beginning, literally since Gust. That's why it's called Gust. And it's been a card that, people love and people also hate. So some of the pros of it are you can get around walls. You can pull up liabilities on the bench from, Pokemon like Mew or Pokemon like Squawkabilly that give you insane power, but they need to have a drawback somehow, right? So it helps keep your opponent in check. It also helps the game from taking too long. I'm going to be honest with you guys, in every game that I play, I hate stall decks and I hate wall decks. I just feel like they're so boring. And I know, we can get into this whole argument and discussion, whatever, about what the importance is of having different archetypes. Maybe everything doesn't have the same win con, but at a certain point, are we actually having fun here playing a 45-minute game that I'm constantly getting milled, I can only play one card per turn? I mean, to me, I just never have fun with that. So when I saw that Gust was getting reprinted, I got really excited. Now, there's been a lot of discourse about it though, because a lot of people are saying, hey, it's fine to have Gust effects, but maybe it should be printed in a different way. So to be clear, Boss's Orders, you get to pick your opponent's Pokemon and they are forced to put it into the active spot. Now, historically, we've had cards like Guzma that are almost kind of like a prime catcher, where, you get to gust up one of your opponent's Pokemon and then you also get to pull up one of the Pokemon on your bench into your active. That was honestly a little bit broken. That's why I think having it tied to a one-time use item like Prime Catcher is actually pretty balanced. But I always felt that Boss's Orders was a good balance. Keep in mind, this is a supporter card, so you can only play one supporter per turn. You are giving up a good chunk of, deck strength for this. Now, on the flip side, even though I think it's a pretty balanced card, I think because of that, it's always played. Most decks play Boss's Orders. Unless you play so far behind, you want to just run a bunch of counter catchers, right? Because then you can just use your item slot for counter catcher and then not take up your one supporter for the turn. You can counter catcher and then also research and C7 cards, right? Or you can put things in the discard pile that you need to power up, your Pokemon in the active spot, right? I just think having it tied to a supporter is the best way to balance something like this. But TBCI seems to want to try different things. Now they're starting to print gust effects on Pokemon in the active, right? You evolve this like the Hariyama. You evolve it and you gust up one of your opponent's Pokemon. Iron Bundle, even though it's not an evolution Pokemon, when you decide to use it, you can have your opponent choose which one of their bench Pokemon they want to gust up. So let's take a look at Jake Gearhart's post here on X. He said, Pokemon's game designers making bad game design decisions, as usual, nothing here. The only reason to suspect anything different this time around was how well their Gust is handled in TCG pockets. They don't seem to have learned their lesson with this and 3 prizers. So obviously Jake Gearhart here, a little bit on the negative side, which is fine. I think it's good to be critical of game design decisions because, these game designers, they're testing these games out in a very closed environment. And when the greatest players in the world get their hands on this and they break the game with these things, you need to learn from it. Now, I personally don't think that Boss's Orders is actually unhealthy for the game. I mean, there's been just as many times that I win by a boss that I've lost by a boss. And I felt like, hey, I set up my board perfectly, but my opponent had an out. It's important to look at things like TCG Pocket, right? Where TCG Pocket, although it's also a Pokemon TCG game, it is a vastly different game than the regular TCG game. So I don't necessarily like it when people make comparisons between a game that has just a completely different, they're just completely different cards. It's a different rule set. The decks are slower. It's a mobile game, so it's supposed to be a faster paced game. It's a little hard to make the comparison. This one, though, I will give Jake Gearhart the drops where necessary. I actually like his idea about the Cyrus card. So this is the card, the Gust Effect, that is played in TCG Pocket. Again, different format, but I think it's interesting to consider. Switch in one of your opponent's bench Pokemon that has damage counters on it to the active spot. What's interesting about this is because we are moving into a format where damage counters matter again. I mean, one of the issues that I had with most of Scarlet and Violet is that everything was a one-shot until Dragapult. And that's why I like Dragapult, because I got to play around damage counters. I felt like it was really cool setting up multiple prize cards on one turn and kind of having that, you know, putting my opponent into checkmate type feeling. And you're also making it so that, again, you have to plan ahead. So I like this because it does balance it out. I don't think bosses needs to be changed into this, to be clear. Like, I don't think we need to change boss, but it is interesting to think about how there could be more interesting ways to make a boss type effect without breaking the game. So I just want to go back to talking about why people are upset about boss. People are saying that it's too much power tied to a supporter card, and because of that, people are just running 3 or 4 of them in every deck, and it makes deck building boring. I do think I agree with part of that. I mean, listen, one of the biggest complaints I've always had about the Pokemon TCG is that you could build a meta deck, dismantle all of the Pokemon and a couple of the trainers, and then still have like 60% of another meta Pokemon deck, right? You know, unlike other games like Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh! Actually, I really shouldn't comment too much about Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I haven't played it since the OG days. Or maybe take Hearthstone into example. You know, there are some trainers and cards that just simply overlap. They're just splashable cards that go on everything. But when I feel like I look at a Pokemon deck, A, and then I look at B, and like 40% of them are the same cards, it does kind of make the deck building in this game feel a little bit less expansive. So having cards that kind of take extra thought or maybe appeal to a specific archetype versus another one, I think it's really interesting to have more of that dynamic than just, yes, a generic boss effect that everybody has. I want to go back to the fact that people are saying that boss is just too impactful on a supporter. I think it's the only way to balance it. I think once you start putting gust effects on items and gust effects on Pokemon that don't have the downside, you need to make them weaker. So that's why on most of these other things that we're seeing, unless it's like a stage 2, you know, if it's a basic, like a bundle, your opponent gets to choose what they put up. So you do have to be more careful when you use your bundle, because if you use it at the wrong time, your opponent could always just pick a card that they don't care about and let you kill it, right? Like, maybe they'll give you a Budu instead of throwing their EX up. But meanwhile, you're like, oh, I really want to kill their EXer on the bench. Oh, okay, they just threw up their one prizer. Like, who cares? I mean, there's an argument there, right? Especially when one prizers are going to be more important now that we have a 3 prize meta. But I don't know. I also feel like that giving your opponent that chance also just allows for more stall tactics, allow for longer games. You need to find a way to make this game faster, but still operate in a fair way. And I think that's TPCI's biggest hurdle, right? Best of 3s should not be taking 120 minutes to do, right? That's why we see the timer, the overtime timer go down, right? To +1 instead of +3. That's why we're starting to see a lot more acceleration cards. They want the game to move faster, but you also can't make it so fast where people lose on turn 2, right? So that's why I always thought that boss being tied to your supporter, that is your supporter for the turn. You are getting a very powerful card. But I'm going to be honest with you. There's a lot of other supporters that are extremely powerful. Like Professor's Research is a great card. There are so many decks in Pokemon that work off of discarding things, especially discarding energies, that Professor's Research is just, it's insanely good. And so I can't tell you how many times I've had a boss and a research in my hand, and I said to myself, I need to research. But I want to boss, but I also need to research. And I think that in and of itself is enough of a difficulty curve without having to complicate things. Having to make that decision of like, hey, I could only play one supporter this turn. Do I boss up and take the KO, but then I have no hand, and then next turn I get Iono'd? Or do I play the research, try to get more cards, and put myself in a better situation for the following turn? I think that's where the difficulty comes from. I don't think the difficulty comes from, you know, making the argument, hey, he Pidgeot searched for a boss and won the game. Well, you could have killed the Pidgeot, right? Like, you don't blame the boss, blame the fact that he was able to get the Pidgeot early. I think the only time, in my own personal experience, that boss's orders has ever felt bad, and this is very limited, is when you get Iono down to like 1, you have Win on board, your opponent is in a checkmate situation, and they Hail Mary top deck a boss's orders. Does that feel bad? Yes. But you know what? I played that game, and I made the turn before that saying, hey, listen, I win as long as they don't get boss's orders. And most of the time, they're probably not going to get the boss's orders. If they have it, then that's just the way the game works. So I've never really been bothered by boss. You know, with things like this, the last thing I want to say is you have to not just look at the strength of the card and what the format looks like with that card in it. You have to look at what the format looks like without the card in it. Now, right now, TPCI has printed a lot of Pokemon cards that gust up Pokemon. I would be curious. I honestly would be curious to see how the format looked without boss for like 2 sets, just to see how gusts being exclusively tied to either items or Pokemon felt in the game. My prediction would be, I just don't think it's enough, and I think it just prolongs the game more. But I don't want to say that as a fact, because I really would love to just see it. Honestly, part of me is almost like, do I want to make a couple of custom decks and just play against a friend and just test out a no boss format? What does that look like? But you have to then test that against a Venusaur or against, you know, the Snorlax deck that we used to have. That, like, unfortunately, that's why these cards exist, so that somebody can't just wall up and then you play a 90-minute deck out game. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants to play their top deck, draw, pass. Draw, pass. Oh, I have to mill, draw, pass, mill, draw, pass, mill. Nobody wants to do that. That is not fun. And honestly, I think the people who play those kinds of decks, like, are you actually having fun? Because if you are, I have some choice words for you. But I joke, but really what I'm trying to say is, part of me wishes that we could see what the game looked like without it, but I do think that it's unfortunately a necessary evil. I think the reason why people hate boss is because of what I said earlier, where you have game on board, your opponent gets it, and you just lose to something on your bench. But I don't think the boss's order is the problem there. You had liabilities, you played the game to a certain point where you were 2 prize cards away. That's the problem, it's not boss. Boss is not the illness, it's just the response. So that's just one thing I wanted to talk about. I'm curious what your thoughts are on boss's orders. Do you want it in the format? Do you think we don't need it? Honestly, do you think it's one of those things that like holds the game back? Or do you think it's something that propels it forward? So let me know in the comment section down below. If you enjoy this, leave a like, leave a thumbs up, leave a comment. Would love to hear from you guys, and I will see you in the next video.